Let's talk about phones. They really do make the world turn. Your phones not only make you feel connected with people all over the world and help you keep up with your daily routine, but also provides you with access to all of the world's news at any moment. They are a great way of staying informed. In general, there's nothing wrong with using your phone. But what happens when people become glued to their phones? They become obsessed. They have a hard time separating real life and the online world, and that can be really damaging to your physical and mental health. It can also be harmful to the people around you. I'm going to talk about the South Park episode Put It Down to talk about how people use their phones and how they react to events going on around the world. I'm going to compare it to the Big Mouth episode Cellsea. The reason why I chose a Big Mouth episode is because in general, Big Mouth has a lot in common with South Park. A lot of people compare the show to Family Guy, and it definitely does seem to have some influence from that show, but I find more comparison to South Park. They are both shows about young kids being vulgar, raunchy, and topical, and I gotta say I like it much more in South Park than in Big Mouth. In general, I think Big Mouth is way too graphic and relies on using the exact same type of joke in every episode. It's just sex joke this, sex joke that, non-stop. That can be funny in moderation, but when they do it as much as this show does it, and goes as far as this show does, it can be rather annoying. I understand that the point of the show is to make kids more comfortable with puberty, and on that front, that's great. I think shows like this are very important. I just wish they did it in a way that's less disgusting. South Park is much funnier because they have a bigger range of jokes, and their cardboard cutout style keeps the show from being too graphic. The other reason I think Big Mouth is like South Park is because a lot of the plots that were done on Big Mouth were done earlier and, in my opinion, better on South Park. Although Big Mouth isn't the first show to imitate South Park, and South Park isn't necessarily a completely original show, there's even an episode of the show called The Simpsons Already Did It, Big Mouth has a fair share of plots in common with South Park. An episode where a girl develops boobs and the boys obsess over them. South Park did it. An episode where kids make rankings of the opposite sex. South Park did it. An episode where the kids learn sex ed from a teacher who's never had sex before. South Park did it. A storyline involving a war between the boys and the girls. Even when South Park did it, it wasn't good. The episodes I'm comparing here aren't the most obviously similar pair of episodes, but they still share a basic idea and have a similar moral, although they go about it in completely different ways. And it's important to see how these shows would tackle the same idea and use them in a way that those two shows would do it. In a way that really represents what the shows are, their style, their world, their strengths, their weaknesses, what makes them similar, and what makes them different. First up, Put It Down. For context, this episode aired on September 20th, 2017. Around this time, North Korea conducted nuclear tests. The president, at the time, was constantly tweeting things about the situation, which worried a lot of people. The episode begins with Tweek giving a performance about the current political climate at the time with North Korea. It's informative. Craig, Tweek's boyfriend, is constantly trying to calm him down and gives him suggestions on what to do to feel better and maybe try to help, like bake cupcakes for the Koreans. The president, who in the show is represented by their former classroom teacher, Mr. Garrison, in the likeness of Donald Trump, tells them not to trust the cupcakes that Tweek sent, and this gets Tweek really nervous, prompting Craig to calm him down in the most 2017 way possible with a fidget spinner. Very soon, a missile flies over Tweek's house sent by North Korea, along with some more tweaks from the president, seemingly making the situation worse. Now let's take a break from the main plot and switch over to the subplot. Cartman has a girlfriend. No, really, he does. After breaking up with her in the previous episode, Cartman apparently gave her another chance because, according to him, she was going to try and kill herself. But this turns out to be false when his girlfriend Heidi shows Stan the voicemail Cartman left her, saying that he was going to kill himself if she didn't take him back. And the other boys find it absolutely hilarious. Feeling embarrassed, Cartman says that he is actually going to kill himself just to get people to take the situation of suicide more seriously, just so he can get more attention. Unfortunately for him, he has to compete with the kids who are trying to spread awareness of distracted driving. So he metaphorically tries to take the spotlight by informing people about the dangers of suicide, and then literally tries to take the spotlight by singing a rap about it. As it turns out, the reason why people are so distracted while they're driving is because they're constantly on their phones reading the president's tweets about North Korea. Not looking where they're going, they run kids over with their cars and kill them. The next day, the kids have a candlelight service for the student that was run over by that car. Cartman is mad that they're more focused on that than his supposed suicide attempt, saying that the kid who was run over is already dead and there's nothing they can do about it. They need to focus on people like him who are alive but considering killing themselves. In general, I believe that we definitely should be looking out for those who are suicidal. But in this episode specifically, they make it clear that Cartman is not actually thinking about killing himself and is only doing it for the attention. This is shown by the fact that when Heidi tells Cartman about the other suicidal kids, he gets jealous, saying that this is specifically about him killing himself. Eric Cartman is not a character that is made to be in the right. He is intentionally made to be someone who is kind of fucked up in the head, honestly. But back to the main plot. Tweek is still concerned over the situation with North Korea, and the president's tweets appear to be making it worse. Now the Koreans have Tweek targeted and nowhere to strike. Craig takes Tweek to the amusement park to try and calm his nerves, but the president knows where Tweek is at and tweets about it, freaking him out even more. These tweets are distracting people who are driving cars on the amusement park rides, causing more and more people to be run over. This causes havoc at the amusement park, not because of what North Korea is doing, but because of how people react to the president's tweets about it. Craig tries to tell Tweek that logically it wouldn't make sense for North Korea to bomb the US, but Tweek doesn't want to hear it. This angers Craig because he is constantly having to deal with Tweek's anxieties despite making an effort to try and calm him down. Tweek wants to feel better, but he's just not quite hearing the things that he wants to hear. Back at school, Cartman once again asks why they are doing this if the person is already dead, and Heidi tells him that it's not about solving the problem so much as it is about talking through your feelings and comforting those who need it. Although this makes Cartman mad and saying that he is definitely going to kill himself, this gives Craig an idea. He goes over to Tweek's house, who stayed home from school, and asks him how he feels. Tweek vents on how crazy things have been and how he feels like he has no control over his life. And rather than trying to calm him down or distract him from the situation, Craig listens to Tweek's concerns and tries to sympathize with him. Despite the fact that nothing about the situation has changed, Tweek feels better, because he got to express his feelings and have someone listen to him. This inspires Tweek to write another song, a more coherent one. It's all about putting down the phone, specifically while being President of the United States. During the song, Cartman throws in a little rap number about suicide. They then honor the kids who died from distracted driving, and one of those kids happens to be Kenny. All the South Park residents, children, and adults agree that there are definitely times when you are on your phones and should just put it down. Also, Cartman doesn't kill himself. I gotta say, I'm sad that this episode is over, not just because it was really good, but because now we gotta talk about Big Mouth. So this story technically has two parts. The second part titled Obsessed, but I'm only gonna talk about the first part, Cellsea. One, because the first part is a more appropriate comparison than the second part, and two, it's hard enough having to talk about one episode of Big Mouth. I can't talk about another. Matthew is seen texting a boy he met at a pharmacy, while Maury the hormone monster acts like a creep. When the boy calls, Matthew gets nervous and declines it, but accidentally sends him a text that he didn't mean to send. Meanwhile, Nick's sister gets a new phone and gives her old phone to Nick. This phone is apparently sentient. Meanwhile, also, Jay is in the closet discovering more of his sexual identity by fucking a turkey. This is just a dream, but it leaves him wondering if that turkey was a boy or a girl. And even though that was just a dream, this is something that Jay actually does. He then starts watching a Canadian Netflix show about a magician on a journey of sexual discovery. Jay is also into magic, so this kind of show actually connects with him. The way I'm talking about these plots make them sound not as bad, but I'm mostly avoiding the disturbing parts. The content of these scenes are actually more gross than I'm letting on. Anyway, Nick's new phone encourages him to take a picture. A very specific picture. Thankfully, he doesn't do it, but then it tells him to blow his friend Andrew off after school. And because of the nature of the show, I need to specify that he ditches him after school. Andrew goes over to Missy, who informs him that she's unplugged from her phone and that he should do it too. Meanwhile, Matthew solves his pharmacy boy problem by sending him several random texts and treating it like it's just another thing that he does. Andrew officially signs off his phone, while Nick becomes more and more obsessed with his new one. Matthew brings Jessie over to his house and she meets his parents, who apparently don't know he's gay, the father at least. They go over to Matthew's room and plan a big FaceTime with Pharmacy Boy. Andrew goes over to Nick's house to hang out, but Nick is too occupied with his clingy ass phone. He gets irritated with Nick being on his phone so much, especially considering that he asked him to shit his pants on camera, so he leaves. Andrew asks Nick's father how he used to talk to his friends without cell phones and social media, and he tells him that they used to get together at dinner parties, giving Andrew the idea to throw one, hoping to get Nick and everyone else off their phones. But during this dinner party scene, everyone just stays on their phone until Andrew confiscates them, and it's shown that Nick is starting to develop a sexual relationship with his phone. I've heard of people being into their phones, but goddamn. Also, Coach Steve is serving at this party because after getting fired from the school, he has a different job in each episode. It's shown that no one at this party can go 2 seconds without being on their phones. Being starved, they all gang up on Andrew and grab their phones. Andrew is initially mad at Nick for being so glued to his phone until he shows him that his lock screen is a picture of the two of them, with a filter that makes him look better. Jay finishes his show and is left unsatisfied because they don't exactly say what the main character's sexuality is. So the ghosts in the attic bring the character to life so that he can sing a song about the spectrum of sexuality. This leaves Jay a little more satisfied and more clear of his own sexuality. He goes downstairs to officially come out, but sees that everyone at the party had already left. Matthew sees Pharmacy Boy's social media update and decides to try and casually meet up with him. He gets nervous, but eventually walks over to him and they talk. And during their conversation, Jessie takes a picture of them. When Andrew gets back online, he sees a picture of Missy and Lars and gets jealous, but eventually just ignores it. And Nick continues his relationship with his phone. As I said, there's a part 2 to it, but I think that's enough big mouth for now. Both of these episodes have the idea of constantly being on your phones and the overall message of putting them down when needed. Also, despite not being musicals, both of these episodes feature multiple songs, which I will talk about later. These episodes also both feature gay couples, giving them LGBT representation. Although in South Park, the couple was already established before Put It Down, while in Big Mouth, the couple had recently just met and appeared to be forming. Now, let's talk about the commentary. One of the biggest aspects of South Park is how they satirize current events. The way the show is animated allows them to produce episodes in only a week, much faster than pretty much any other animation out there. Because of this, they are able to stay up to date with current events, so the things that happen in real life can be referenced and talked about in the show, even as it's still happening. As I mentioned before, Put It Down came out around the time North Korea conducted nuclear tests, and how President Donald Trump responded to it on Twitter. Both of those things combined got a lot of people concerned that there were going to be attacks to the USA from North Korea. People were concerned about the possible dangers. In the advent of the 24-hour news cycle, people have access to all kinds of news sources. On TV, on the internet, on their phones, newspapers, articles, social media. It's hard to get away from it. It's constantly in our faces. On one hand, it's a good way to stay informed. But on the other hand, it can be kind of stressful, having to constantly deal with politics, the next tragedy, or the possibility of another world war. It's especially hard when those things are far away from us and mostly out of our control. So how do we deal with it? Tweek is a hyperactive, nervous, and fidgety child. He's used in this episode to represent how some people react to the news and how scary it can be to hear it. Another thing South Park uses a lot is exaggeration. Although the events of the episode aren't nearly as extreme as they were in real life, the way they use exaggeration allows them to showcase how people feel when they hear news like this. In the episode, both North Korea and the president seem to be literally targeting Tweek. So Tweek being freaked out about all this actually does make logical sense. But sometimes in real life, when things happen or people say things, people might see it as a personal attack to themselves. The episode represents that by literally having that happen to Tweek. However, it doesn't undermine the idea that Tweek is still spending too much time worrying about the news, so much that he misses school over it. The episode shows that although there are many threats happening around Tweek, nothing actually literally happens to him. The most that happens is that North Korea flies a missile over his house, and the president essentially challenging them to do more. Although it seems like Tweek's entire world is going down, it is mostly just threats, which is how a lot of what goes on around the world is really like. People will assume that anything that seems bad, or even things that actually are bad, will cause more damage than it actually has the power to do, like start World War III. That's not to say that there aren't things around the world that are just absolutely terrible and will legitimately cause harm to many people. But people do sometimes exaggerate what the stakes are in the situation, often to get other people to care and be informed. And things like that can cause a lot of mental harm and stress to people. To be fair, a lot of the time people don't entirely know what could happen as a result of current events, and will tweet what they feel could happen and could cause harm. And they might even be right in saying that it could happen, but often it doesn't. But one of the hardest things about all of this is that all of these threats and things happening are so far away from us that just one person or even 100 people can't really do anything to solve the problems once and for all. But the episode makes it clear that it's not always about solving the problem. Put It Down also highlights the dangers of distracted driving and how if you aren't paying attention to the road, whether it be because of texting or reading the news or other reasons, you could potentially take the life of an innocent bystander. Although you can't do anything about the victims' lives, you can, however, console the people who are still there and help them through their feelings. Because sometimes people just want their voices to be heard and have someone there for them to make them feel less alone. In the episode, the distracted driving kids hand out flyers and have memorial services for the victims of distracted driving. And Craig figures out how to calm Tweek down, not with facts, but by letting Tweek share his feelings about the situation to him. As it turns out, putting down his phone and just letting out his frustrations was all Tweek needed. That might be exactly what people who are stressed out about current events need. Maybe they don't need solutions necessarily. Maybe they just need comfort. Sometimes it's not about definitive ends, but rather doing the most that you can. While it's great to be informed, when it gets too much for you to handle, maybe it would be better to just put down the phone and not be so obsessed with the news. Now let's talk about that song. No, not that one. That's better. At first, it seems like the song is supposed to be about not being on the phone while driving, but the actual song is about not being on the phone while being president. Which is funny because it's absolutely true, for reasons more than just people might get distracted driving while reading presidential tweets. I believe that rather than being on the phone while being president, you should just be the president, do your job, and not spend as much time tweeting as much as you do. Because the things you say really do affect people. And who knows, maybe if Trump actually had followed this episode's ideologies, he wouldn't have gotten his Twitter deleted. Come to think of it, this episode has aged well. Once again, the use of exaggeration excels during the song. Although the overt message to the song is, don't be on the phone while being president, I don't think it's lost on anyone that the message is also to stay off the phone while driving. It's a pretty simple message that, while important, doesn't need to be spelled out as much. To a lesser extent, this episode also talks about suicide. However, it isn't really much commentary about suicide itself, although they do mention facts about how often it occurs and that there are many people out there who are feeling suicidal. The actual purpose of it being there is Cartman seeking attention. With all of the things going on, Cartman feels like his very obviously fake suicide plot isn't getting as much attention as he wants. So he keeps saying that he's actually gonna kill himself if they don't take it seriously. The idea here is that he's making it all about himself and doesn't actually care about other suicidal kids. This is all about him specifically being suicidal. He even takes over the Put It Down song at the end just so he can rap about killing himself. As messed up as it is, this is exactly the kind of thing Cartman would do. He likes taking advantage of the current issues simply for his own benefit. In one episode titled The Sissy, he pretends to be transgender just so he can get his own bathroom and nothing else. Overall, I think the messages in this episode are great. I think this episode showcases why it's important to put down the phone from time to time. Although it can be unhealthy to be as glued to your phone as much as a lot of people are, the episode explains why people are constantly on their phones in a way that's kind of understandable. It also tells us how we can help those who are feeling overwhelmed by news, current events, and even grief. It's episodes like these that show just how much heart South Park can have despite all of the darker and raunchier moments. And this episode's messages are something that I find to be true to this day. As for Cellsea, the message is pretty simple. Put down your phone and spend time with your friends and family. There's nothing really wrong with that moral, it's just kind of played out and basic. The episode doesn't really shine a light on anything new, and on top of that, none of the characters seem to really learn that lesson because they all just end up back on their phones. I get that that's the joke, but it's still pretty uninteresting. There is an episode of The Loud House similar to this called Antisocial, and that episode was equally as uninteresting, but at least the characters appear to be following the lesson at the end. And I know that there are a bunch of other shows that have this same type of being obsessed over your phone story, but this episode adds pretty much nothing else to the table on that front. It's the same get off your phone or you'll become a giant asshole moral that I see almost everywhere. This episode also uses exaggeration in that since the phone has a face and a mind of its own, Nick is able to kind of have a relationship to it to show how attracted he is to the phone. I see what they were trying to do, but I find the actual execution of it all kind of forced. I find Cellsea the phone annoying, and Nick is just such a pushover doing everything she tells him to do for no reason, just to force the idea that Nick is getting obsessed. Since the story is so boring, half of the episode's run is filled with a bunch of dirty jokes. That's the majority of the show in general. As for the rest of the characters, their stories, although involve a lot of phone usage, aren't explicitly about using the phone too much. After the dinner party scene, they don't have any resolution with their phone obsession. They're just kind of dropped from the overall moral in favor of their own personal stories, when they could have been used to show why it's good to stay off the phone using their personal reasons for them being on them in the first place. And to spoil the next episode, the way they solve Nick's obsession is his mom just smashing the phone right in front of him, essentially killing it. Which on one hand is fair considering that he got the garage door destroyed, but on the other hand is kind of hypocritical considering Nick's mom was just as obsessed with her phone in the episode before. Because of this resolution, a lot of the events in the episode feel kind of pointless, because Nick nor any other character seem to learn a lesson about phone usage, and they only stay off them because they are physically separated from them. There's no real character arc here, and every character is as obsessed with their phones just as much as before, and in some characters' cases, even more so than before. Another issue I have with Cellsea and Big Mouth as a whole is the flow of each of the stories. There are so many plots going on and they bounce around them a little too much. I didn't talk about the events in the episode in the exact order that they were shown necessarily because they didn't spend enough time on each of the plots in each sitting. In the 4 different plots in the episode, they spend a minute on each of them, then go to the next one. Spend a minute on it, and then go to the next one. And then they go back to the previous plot after only spending 1 minute away from it. For example, after the scene in Nick's room, they go to a scene with Matthew for like 10 seconds, then they go back to Nick's house where Andrew talks with Nick's father. They should have put this scene immediately after the scene in Nick's room, since they are already at Nick's house and the scene takes place immediately after that. They should have never cut away from it. The scenes aren't spaced out well in my opinion, because they keep switching the plots way too fast. They end the scenes too soon, before they really progress at all. It keeps the story from having a good flow to it. Typically when shows do this, it's either done to create suspense or to break up suspenseful moments. But none of the scenes in the episode are like that. All that happened here was Nick and Andrew have a little argument. It's not a really intense scene that requires a break from the tension. Although Put It Down has a lot of things going on, they're able to tie everything together with one central theme all throughout the episode, rather than just one random point during the middle, in the case of Big Mouth. And the time spent on the plot line in each sitting is much longer and has much more plot progression each time they go through it than the Big Mouth episode did. The pacing is much better. It's much more satisfying when they switch over to the next plot, and when they do switch plots, it's usually to a scene that takes place much later than the last time we saw them, rather than cutting back and forth to scenes taking place right after each other. As I mentioned before, both of these episodes have LGBT representation. In Cellsea, you have Matthew and his relationship with Pharmacy Boy, as well as being in the closet to his parents. That part is explored more in the next episode, but you still see a little bit of it here. Along with that, you also have Jay trying to discover his sexual identity through a TV show as well as through the song. During the song, Jay learns about all the different kinds of sexualities and orientations a person could have. I can't really say if all of the information in the song is accurate since I'm not in the LGBT community, but if it is, then I have to say that in general, the song as a whole could be helpful to someone. This is what the show as a whole does try to do after all. Jay even says,
"I guess I did learn something from that stupid Canadian show."
Which is I guess what the writers think that they're doing with their show. In Put It Down, you have Tweek and Craig. Here's the story around their relationship. All the way back in season 3, there was an episode titled Tweek vs. Craig, where for no real reason at all of the boys wanted Tweek and Craig to fight. Since that episode, many fangirls have shipped Tweek and Craig together in all of their fan art. Then, nearly 2 decades later, in season 19, there's an episode titled Tweek x Craig, where a couple of the Asian students shipped Tweek and Craig together in their fan art called Yaoi. The art in question happens to be actual fan art from fans of the show. Because of this, everyone in town wanted Tweek and Craig together, and were disappointed when Tweek and Craig didn't want to have a relationship. So Tweek and Craig's solution to all of it was to just pretend to be in a relationship to make the town happy. Then by the time of this episode, their fake relationship seemed to have sprouted into a real one. So yeah, that's kind of a weird story, but it's South Park. What do you expect? Rather than having them hug and kiss and be relentlessly in love, it's about the hardship of keeping your partner happy when they're under a lot of stress, and how it can make you feel having to deal with all of it, and having all of your attempts at calming them down not working. It can be annoying when all you're trying to do is help, but they make you feel like you're just making the situation worse. Craig really tries hard to make Tweek feel better about everything going on, and suggests that he does a lot of different things. Bake cupcakes to the Koreans, go to an amusement park, play with fidget spinners. He also tries to calm him down by explaining why North Korea won't attack him. None of these things work, until he hears Heidi talk about letting people express their feelings. When he finally lets Tweek express his feelings, Tweek is happy, and so is Craig. I gotta say, it's one of the most genuinely sweet moments in the entire series. Then Craig helps Tweek spread his message by singing the Put It Down song, and the episode ends with a shot of them holding hands. Then there's Cartman and Heidi. In the previous season, they started a relationship after being the only people at school not on social media. This carried over to the episode right before this one, White People Renovating Houses. At the end of that episode, Cartman officially breaks up with Heidi, but they apparently get back together sometime before this episode started, because Cartman said that he was going to kill himself if she doesn't take him back, and then tries to say that it was Heidi who said that she would kill herself, which is a very Cartman thing to do. Now, the rest of the season shows just how bad their relationship is and how toxic Cartman is to Heidi. It's intentionally so, but it's still toxic. And this episode is no exception. It's not nearly as bad here, but there are some signs showing. But, taking it apart from the story arc, just looking at it as one singular story, I gotta say, their relationship actually kinda works here. When Cartman tries to take the spotlight away from distracted driving awareness, Heidi calls him out, which is another good message. If your partner is being problematic, don't be afraid to say something. And she doesn't really yell at Cartman, she just tells him to stop and tells him why what they're doing is important. And although it's painfully obvious that Cartman is not going to kill himself, Heidi's still concerned about him and really does seem to want to help him. In Cellsea, you have Matthew trying to talk to Pharmacy Boy. The reason why he's called Pharmacy Boy is because Matthew met him at a pharmacy on Valentine's Day. As with the commentary of the episode, it's just kinda simple. Someone being too shy to talk to someone that they like, which, while relatable, isn't very remarkable. It's mostly just Matthew messing up with Pharmacy Boy, then trying to make up for it. There seem to be very few stakes to his mistakes because every time he messes up, he easily just bounces right back, no issue. The problems were just solved like that. Accidentally sends him a text, just says that it was a mistake. Even if he's nervous, it was still an easy thing for him to do in the grand scheme of things. There's also a little story about Andrew being jealous of his ex Missy being with Lars, the handicapped kid. But it's even more basic, unremarkable, and boring. Though it doesn't take up too much of the episode. Between these two episodes, there are 5 songs, 3 in Put It Down and 2 in Cellsea. Let's go over each of them. The first song in Put It Down isn't so much a song as it is just Tweek screaming about the situation in North Korea and how they're all gonna die. It's hilarious just how over the top the song is, and it provides a good exposition as to what the episode is gonna be about. What a way to start an episode. Next we got Cartman's suicide rap, aka Eric, We Don't Want You to Die. The way he's rapping is supposed to be a parody of Eminem. It's funny because, once again, he's only doing it for the attention. But the funniest part about the song is Heidi awkwardly standing there holding a boombox while Cartman is just calling her crazy right in front of her. I've talked about the message of the Put It Down song several times already, but the song itself is very enjoyable just as a song. Even if Craig isn't the best singer, it still sounds very nice. Tweek does a good job on the piano as well as providing the backup vocals, and the rest of the kids do a good job on the chorus. And of course, Cartman throws in another Eminem rap about suicide in there. Overall, I love this song. It's really catchy, has a good message, and it's still very funny. Worth noting that the song is a parody of the USA for Africa song, We Are the World. As for Cellsea, there's The Spectrum of Sexuality, a show tune about the different kinds of sexual identities there are. Again, I can't say for sure about the accuracy of it all, but it seems to know what it's talking about. I wouldn't say it's really catchy and the singing isn't that great, and like most of the show, it's a little graphic. But it's informative, so I guess there's good reason for it to exist. And the last song is during the end credits called Phone Down. Admittedly, this is a really good song. I like how the music sounds and the lyrics are fine, and it ties to the central theme of the episode. However, it's an already existing song by Lost Kings, meaning the show doesn't get creative points for it. Although it is just an end credit song, so it really doesn't matter how original it is. It still sounds nice. Even if it is there to teach a message that no one in the episode really learned. Now it's time to talk about one of the biggest aspects of both of these shows, the comedy. Above all else, South Park is a comedy. Specifically, a satirical comedy. No matter what issues they're tackling, there's always room for humor. As I mentioned before, South Park loves using exaggeration. Despite how serious a lot of these topics are, the show always takes it to an extreme in a way that makes it funny. In this episode, a bunch of kids get run over by cars in really over-the-top ways. It is physically impossible for bumper cars to run anyone over because of how they're attached to the ground. So the fact that it happens here makes the idea of distracted driving really funny. Another thing that's really funny are the president's tweets, basically trying to push North Korea to its limits and driving Tweek more insane. Now, it wasn't as funny in real life, but here it's pretty funny. They even make a lot of suicide jokes. The episode is aware that suicide is a really serious thing and requires as much attention as possible. But it's also aware that Cartman is the kind of person to take advantage of that kind of attention. He's a selfish, bigoted idiot. That's something that the show and fans of the show are already aware of. It's not as disrespectful to the idea of suicide if the person being disrespectful is that messed up in the head. If Stan or Kyle were doing something like this, it would be a little more uncomfortable. But since you have someone who is as intentionally politically incorrect as Cartman is, it allows him to tell jokes that the show doesn't necessarily agree with. Cartman saying that he is definitely going to kill himself is funny because we know that he won't. No matter how serious he says he is about it, we know that that is not actually going to happen. So it's okay to laugh at it. There are just a ton of good jokes in this episode, but my absolute favorite is this one during the song.
I'll take the pledge.
I'll take the pledge. And I'll take the pledge.
That just cracks me up every time. As for Big Mouth, I feel like the hormone monsters are what really makes and breaks the show for you. As in, if you think the show is good, it's probably because of the hormone monsters. If you think the show is bad, it's probably because of the hormone monsters. Without the hormone monsters, I feel like the show would be kind of boring. The characters aren't really that interesting and are just the same type of horny teenagers / preteens in different bodies. Which is why the hormone monsters are used so much, to provide something interesting in these otherwise underwhelming scenarios. And as for their contributions, they mostly provide a bunch of sex jokes over and over and over again, saying that these young kids want to do a lot of things to these other young kids. You either love it or you hate it, and it's just not the kind of humor for me. By that I mean I like sex jokes and shows in moderation, but using these types of jokes over and over and over again can get annoying and progressively less funny. I understand the purpose of these jokes in the hormone monsters is to get kids more comfortable with the idea of puberty, which is all fine, but I feel like they cross the line a few too many times. It also makes talking about the humor of the show hard to talk about in a user-friendly way. I really wish they would vary the jokes a little more. One joke I can talk about and say that I liked was when Gordy, the protagonist of the show Jay was watching, was about to reveal his sexual identity, then immediately saying it was the end of the show. I liked it in a sort of trolling kind of way. The last thing I want to talk about is the art and animation of these episodes and shows as a whole. Starting with the character designs, the characters in Big Mouth look very strange. The characters have giant, disproportionate foreheads and really big mouths. Also, that's why they call it that. It's supposed to emulate the awkward teenage phase, which would make sense if they only use it for the children's designs, but the adults are designed exactly the same, and it looks just as uncanny on them. The best way to describe the character designs is that they're just human versions of the characters on fishhooks. But where the show really excels are the hormone monster designs. They all look really unique from each other and are heavily detailed. You can tell that they put a lot of effort into them. As for everything else, the show in general uses really bright colors and lighting, which is probably another thing that draws a lot of people to the show. Its style is very reminiscent of Family Guy. I honestly think on that front, the show looks okay. Then there are other times where they ramp everything up and everything becomes detailed. Very detailed. A little too detailed. So detailed in a way that I wish it wasn't. Let's just say they are not afraid to get up close with the characters. The best animation aspect of Cellsea is probably during the song, where the ghosts in the attic bring a TV character to life and they constantly make people appear and disappear. There's a lot of color blending and shape shifting that looks pretty good. And there's a little bit of dancing in it. Jay bouncing around while Gordy sings while corny is not a bad touch. It keeps the character moving when he's otherwise not doing anything. As for South Park, the characters are made out of cardboard cutouts and each episode is animated in 1 week. It's not really trying to look good, just as good as it needs to. And I gotta say, for a show animated in a week, it still looks okay. There's still a lot that they do with their visuals. The show is really dedicated to this specific style. It looks cheap, but that's exactly what they're going for, and they still try to make it look as good as possible. What helps is the fact that it's consistent in its animation and body movements. Because of the way it's animated, you're able to disassociate it from real life when they're doing things that's over the top. It's crazy how heavily detailed the kid getting hit is, and how smooth the animation is as he's crashing down. They ramped everything the show typically does with its animation up by 100 in just this one scene. To get Big Mouth out of the way, although it's not a show that's really for me, it's also not the worst thing out there. I know the show is really popular, and I can definitely see some merit to it, but overall I find it a little immature. South Park can also be like that, but there's kind of a charm when they do it. It might be the animation or something, I'm not entirely sure, but there's something unique to South Park's immature humor. Big Mouth is probably meant for younger middle school kids, and I can't necessarily recommend it to them either, but I can see why they might get some kind of enjoyment out of it. Cellsea isn't a particularly bad episode of the show, but it's just one that shows why I'm not particularly interested in it. As for Put It Down, I can honestly say that this is one of South Park's best episodes of all time, which is surprising because it's a season 21 episode. It's far from what most people consider the classic era, and yet still shows how great the show can be even after 2 decades. This episode really has a lot of heart to it, which shows that it's more than just a raunchy show. For example, it was kind of disturbing to see that first kid getting hit by a car and seeing his lifeless body laying out on the street, regardless of how good the animation was there. It was especially sad considering he was one of the kids trying to spread awareness of distracted driving. But the very next scene was the kids having a candlelight memorial service for him at the school. They balance out that really dramatic and gruesome moment with a much softer, quieter, and sweeter one. In a way, I was comforted after watching that. This episode is show Kenny getting hit by a car. We see his picture in the memorial section of the song, but we really should have seen him actually die. It would alleviate some of the sadness of the scene because if you know the show, you know that Kenny's just gonna be back in the next episode. This was a story that was made for him. Otherwise, this episode has it all. A good story, good comedy, great music, really impressive animation, representation, a showing of a healthy relationship, a good showing of an unhealthy relationship, and most importantly, has great overall messages. South Park as a whole isn't for everyone. I understand that. But if nothing else, I highly recommend this episode. I think it puts a lot of things in perspective. It's great to be informed of what's going on, but if it gets to a point where current events are constantly stressing you out, maybe you should take a break and put down your phone and talk to someone about it. And of course, you need to put down your phone when you're driving. And most importantly of all of that, put down your phone if you are President of the United States.
Let's all make a pledge to end it right now. Put it